Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone to the last of our inclusive leadership series. Sorry, I've just seen more people come in. Just admit everyone first. Cool. Yeah, so welcome everyone. Big welcome to Ambily, who is a director at GSK, and she's of course recently been recognized for her inclusion in the 2020 Empower Role Model list, which we're very excited to hear all about. We're going to talk about that and more today. Today's webinar is going to be slightly different in format. If you've been to ones previously, it's going to be slightly different to that, in that we're going to keep an open discussion and we're going to keep questions coming in as we go on. So please feel free to either raise your hand or put your questions in the chat box, and then I'll kind of moderate it. It would be really lovely, because we don't have any slides today, to see everyone's faces, because we're going to do like a speaker, like a group view. So that would be good to see everyone's face. And yeah, those are all my housekeeping points before we start. So welcome, Ambily. To begin with, let's have you tell us a bit about yourself, your introduction and a little overview of your journey.
Sure. Thank you, Sresha. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And as an introduction, I'll keep it really brief. So I work at GSK in global regulatory affairs. So obviously GSK is a pharmaceutical company, and within that, regulatory affairs are the people that ensure that our drugs have the proper approvals from regulators, right? So the day job is working in global regulatory affairs. And I've been at GSK about coming up to 13 years, so quite a long journey. But prior to that, I was an academic scientist. So I'll keep the introduction very brief, so we can get to the meat of the questions.
Brilliant, thanks. So yeah, if we want to kind of start digging deeper into kind of some of the themes that we want to cover today in terms of talking about ethnic minorities and diversity, etc. So one of the things which would be nice to start with is to understand, as an ethnic minority yourself, or maybe what you've noticed around you, what have been some of the kind of barriers that you find that, ethnic minorities face in the workplace?
That's a great question. So at this stage, I'll start digging into some of the sort of details. So my own personal background is I grew up actually in India and moved to the UK when I was 13. So as I was growing up, my mum was a nurse. My dad was an engineer, but my mum was working in the NHS and faced racism all the time. She had people very much telling her, "Don't touch me because of the color of your skin." She struggled to progress up the career ladder, etc. And when I watched her when I was a young girl, I always hoped that by the time I grow up, that would not be the case today. And what I've realized through my journey is actually some of those struggles that existed 20 years ago still exist today. And one of the mantras that you grow up with as an ethnic minority is that you must work twice as hard to achieve the same level of success. Now, I thought this was very much a narrative that existed in my family because of my mum's experience. But actually what I've realized is I hear this all of the time from other ethnic minorities. So to tell you a little bit more in depth about my career journey, so I went to university to do an applied biochemistry degree, did a PhD in molecular biology, and then worked as an academic at Imperial College for a couple of years. And then at the end of my postdoc at Imperial, I thought, I'd love to work for pharma. And I started applying, and I found out that I really could not break into pharma. And part of the reason for that barrier was because they said, "You're too much of an academic. You were already considered to have made your career in academia with 2 years postdoc experience." And it took quite a lot of gaining experience in kind of establishing what does pharma need by networking with industry partners. And it took me like 7 years of struggling to kind of establish some links, inroads in to then break into GSK. And once I came into GSK, I had a pretty spectacular rise through the ranks in the initial stages. So I came in pretty much entry-level role, and within 4 years, I was part of the leadership team. Within 6 years, I became a director within as head of EU and EMAP and Stifel Regulatory Affairs. So once I came into GSK, I thought, this is great. You know, there is no glass ceiling within GSK. Applying for the next roll up, and realized that it was really difficult. And the sort of mantra I heard at that point is, you've only got regulatory experience. And I thought, really, is that true? Because I've just come from another sector with a whole host of experience in another sector. And I took the feedback on board. I decided to work in different parts of GSK. I worked in internal audit. I worked externally to GSK on a pulse assignment. GSK does this amazing assignment where they pay you to go and work with an NGO partner for 7 months, and you influence a different industry, right? And I came in with all of this experience and started applying for jobs, and I still couldn't get a role within GSK. And I thought there's a couple of things going on. Either I've reached my level of competence, or there's some other factor that I can't control. And if you remember, I said, you know, I grew up with this narrative from my mum struggling to find a job. And I thought, is this history playing itself again, repeating itself again? So I started then starting to really look around, read about this, talk to my fellow ethnic minorities about whether they were struggling. And I came across the fact that they have employee resource groups where employees for different races come together to kind of talk about some of their concerns and share their mutual experiences. So I got involved with Embrace Employee Resource Group at GSK about a year and a half ago. And it became very apparent through reading about things that are going on in the UK. So we have something called a race report that was published by the Business in the Community that looks at many corporate companies. And it looks at the kind of barriers that are faced by individuals who are trying to progress in companies. And they point out that one of the significant barriers is actually in career rising up to the higher ranks in any organization in the UK. So it's not exclusively a GSK problem. It's actually a problem in almost all the companies in the UK, where you see a real fall in the number of ethnic minorities that can climb the ladder to those very senior roles within an organization. And that kind of problem arises because of a couple of issues, right? I think the underlying issues is that there are certain ways that hiring happens into those higher grades. There's a lot of, if you know the relevant people, it becomes slightly easier. They might recommend you for a particular role where your CV might get shortlisted more easily than somebody who has no connections. And ethnic minorities, we know, generally have less sponsorship. They have less kind of access to those kinds of people who help pull their careers up. That's one of the barriers. Another barrier could simply be not understanding what's expected at those levels because they haven't got the right mentors in place. Mentoring is a key barrier. And also, there's some things about the hiring process itself that can act as a barrier. So humility is something that we're taught in ethnic minority cultures. Whether you're Black or Asian, you're taught to be humble. You're taught not to talk about, hey, look at me, I'm so great. But in an interview, that's what we're expected to do, right? We're supposed to blow our own trumpet. Now, even though I've been in pharma for a long time and in a relatively senior position, when I talk about my achievements, I talk in the we. We did this, we did that. And that's, again, a very common issue. We, in an interview, really need to pull out, I did this, I did that. And that's a common issue that a lot of ethnic minorities face. So those few barriers exist, some of which we can control, some of which the institution needs to help change. That's a really long answer.
No, that's great. So you talked about kind of mentors and sponsorship. And so in terms of, because my next kind of question kind of leading on from that was going to be how, you know, what are kind of some practical things that people could do to try to address these issues. So probably around those things you mentioned, you know, what could be like, when you notice these things happening, what's a good way to try to overcome them?
So mentoring is absolutely key. If you haven't got a mentor, get yourself a mentor. It doesn't even have to be somebody within your department that you're working in. It could be someone in a different part of the organization, or it can even be somebody through LinkedIn, right? You've got access to a massive network of people through LinkedIn. Find someone who's working in the area that you aspire to work in and reach out to them. You know, actually making those connections are really invaluable, because you will learn from somebody else's experience. These lived in experiences will give you kind of tips on how can you make this journey easier for me, right? So mentoring is a really simple thing that is invaluable in helping chart that. But other things is just awareness. I mean, you guys as Warwick MBAs are going to go, in a few years, are going to be leading a lot of these organizations, right? You're going to be working with those senior leadership teams. So having some awareness of these issues and looking around to see how diverse are the companies that we're working in. What can we do to change this? I mean, what we need here is societal change, right? And societal change doesn't happen if there's one or two people talking about this. We need not just black and brown people talking about this. We need allies. We need people of all colors, all race, to talk about equality. We're talking about making it equitable for everybody, you know, making sure there's access to equal opportunity. So if you see a part of a leadership team that is not diverse, question it, whoever you are, to say, do we have, and diversity is not just race diversity, I mean, gender diversity, I mean, do you have LGBTQ representation? Do you have disabled individuals coming in? And if you don't see any of those underrepresented groups, marginalized groups, then ask people in leadership positions what they're doing about it. To the UK business, there's a tangible impact of having diversity. So just ethnic diversity, if we were more ethnically diverse in UK companies, we would be making 29 billion more for the economy, UK economy, right? So there's a reason why companies should be investing in this.
Great. And so from that kind of then leads me nicely on to the next bit that I was going to, because you covered a lot on diversity and kind of bringing people in with different backgrounds. So this, I think, leads nicely to Olga's question about what happens once they're here in terms of, you know, the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion. So Olga asks, what best practices to raise inclusion have you experienced in your career journey?
So there are a couple of aspects of this. There's to raise inclusion in the company itself that you're working in, because once you're in, you need to influence. It's depending on how much work there is to do. You know, some companies are further along this journey, might already have an infrastructure in place, and they might already be working. But if you join a company where there's more work to do in inclusion, then it starts with you raising your hand about looking to see if there's an employee resource group where you can come together with the force of other employees in order to bring this to the attention of leaders. Every company that has made progress on this has done so with leadership support. So if we can empower enough employees to join forces, collective force, to put pressure on the leadership to take this seriously and start looking at how they hire, to see if they have specific programs in place for talent. So they might put a leadership program in place for women. At GSK, we're starting to look at a talent program for ethnic minorities globally. So we already do one for diverse men in the US, but we're trying to expand that to all ethnic minorities globally. So there are tangible things that the organization can do to fix this. Aspirational targets has really worked for the gender agenda to ensure there's enough female diversity, right? So again, putting aspirational targets in place for ethnic minorities is not a bad idea. That's what some of the companies are starting to do. So those are the things that the institution can do. But it depends, again, if you are an ethnic minority and you want to do something for inclusion, get involved, be brave about getting involved and voicing concerns and trying to teach your peers about why things are important. If you're an ally, it's equally important that you're curious and find out and raise your voice, because you might be in a more of a position of power. You might have a voice that other people are willing to listen to, right? And the message is the same. The message is asking for equal opportunities. So there's a role for every individual here to play in terms of driving inclusion.
So we've got some great questions coming in. So I'm going to pick out some of these questions. I think they're relevant to what you're just saying. So we've got one asking, working in the charity mental health sector, they find that it's all majority white female between 25 to 50, and kind of the applicants are the same. So how do we mix things up a bit?
Okay, so change, as I said, always starts with the leaders wanting to make this change. Now, if your leaders are on board and they're saying they can't find the talent, right, then probably not looking in the right places. So generally speaking, if your adverts are written a certain way, it won't be attractive to attract diverse candidates. Firstly, if you're using images with just white employees, it's not going to attract ethnic minorities who might think, am I going to have to struggle to get in? If your suppliers are not being told that this is important, the people you source your candidates from, where are you advertising? That's important, right? So there are specific things that can be done to improve the availability of talent. The talent exists everywhere. You just have to go out and look for it. And we've known this, we've seen this in other sectors when they've said, well, we just don't have people. And then they've put targeted steps in place and it's worked, right? So I think we should focus on making sure that the messages that the company is sending out is right. And then if it's still not working, then really look at the recruitment process if there are barriers in the hiring.
Yeah. And kind of, I guess, to add on to that a little bit is that Linda, hello Linda, asks how to make it more than just a tick box exercise. Is that possible? Is it, yeah.
It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, with the George Floyd murder and the subsequent protests, etc., many companies have started talking about this, right? It suddenly got a lot of attention. And one of the fears that we have is when the attention dies down, the media attention dies down, will this topic disappear? And it becomes less of a priority for leaders. And that's a concern across the board, across all organizations, right? So we have to make sure that it doesn't become a tick box exercise. And part of, I go back to what we're doing within GSK. It's that employee voice, that strength of having those multiple people, multiple membership, asking the same questions of the leadership, holding the leadership accountable. That's how you kind of stop it becoming a tick box, right? There's a group that's holding the leaders accountable to drive change and checking in on progress. So at GSK, we have a very open dialogue. The organization is engaging with the employee resource group. So we are having dialogue to see, is change happening at pace? What do you plan to do in the next 6 months? Can we see that happening? Can we, do we have the authority to go in and challenge if it doesn't? And we, at least in the last few months, we've had a really positive interaction with various senior leaders who are really engaged. And from what I'm hearing, they really are acknowledging that there's work to do, and they are trying to drive that change from the top. So that's how we're doing it in our organization, but the onus is on people within the company to really hold their leadership accountable.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that to kind of understand a little bit about these initiatives at GSK. But I do want to ask this question by, oh, shall I attempt to pronounce his name or her name? I won't. So they say that you alluded to the fact that networks play a big part in getting hired / promoted. Do you think us ethnic minorities therefore tend to leave ourselves shortchanged by not having a diverse network?
Absolutely. I think networking is really, really important. And I think, I can't remember now which report, but I read some report that said the vast majority of ethnic minorities know networking is important, but we are reluctant to do it, right? We don't make time because we put our heads down and get on with the work, hoping that the work will count. And actually, we need to be smart about this. If networking is valuable, we need to invest time in it. And building a network really helps, because you might come across those one or two influential people in your company who can really pull you up, who might never have known you existed in the organization because you just didn't come into their radar, right? So building a network through delivering good work, right? There's no point in just networking and letting your day job fall down. It's really important to keep demonstrating that you're great at doing whatever job you're paid to do. But alongside that, you have to make time to network, because creating that network, you could meet really significant mentors or people who give you opportunities that are just unexpected, that could really lead to great career strides.
Yeah, great. There are questions coming in, but I will come back to those. I think what's quite interesting is you said that at GSK, you've got these employee resource groups, and it kind of depends on the coordination between the company and the group within. So what would be really interesting for us, I guess, to understand is you've been involved in various initiatives. So I read you're part of Embrace, which you brought together with another ERG, which is called Fusion. You've been part of women leadership initiatives, and also you've been supporting BAME students. If you can tell us a little bit about these, what works well about these kind of different initiatives or having them in organizations, and also maybe what other things that can be improved.
Mm-hmm. So employee resource groups are invaluable. So different companies take different approaches to how many different diversity strands they want to prioritize. So at GSK, we prioritize 4 strands. One is gender, one is disability, one is the LGBTQ, and the last one is ethnicity. So within ethnicity, all the other strands, they have one employee resource group name across globe. There is just the one. So for women, it's WLI, Women's Leadership Initiative, that exists across the globe. But for ethnicity, it's slightly different because the race picture is slightly different. So we have Embrace across most countries, but in the US, race issues are quite different to the UK issues or anywhere else in the world. So in the US, we have 3 different groups. One group called Mosaic, which is for African Americans, a group called Fusion for Asians, and a group called Connection Latina for Latin Americans. Now, those 3 populations have some similar challenges, the same challenges I mentioned with Embrace in terms of going up the ladder. We all struggle, but there are slight nuances in differences between the challenges faced between African Americans and an Asian. So, for instance, having our surname, Sresha, being a Banerjee, having an Indian name in the
We're
US.
not related, by the way, in case
We're
anyone.
not related. It's such a common name, right, amongst a certain subgroup. But having that kind of surname is actually quite valuable in the US, where an Indian surname has a certain cachet with it. But African Americans are not treated in the same way, right? So you have different racial challenges. Even in the UK, I would say the Black population are more discriminated against than compared to the Asians. But we all face the issues of discrimination, but it's just more acute with the Black communities. So it's really important for us, while we're united under the banner of Embrace in GSK, we're united in terms of asking for actions. We are also very conscious that we're not branding everybody as a person of color and not looking at the nuances that sit within each of those communities, because it's really important that we don't, as somebody alluded to, a tick box exercise, where some companies may put a BAME target, and the term BAME stands for Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. It's a UK government term. So they might put a BAME target and attract 20% population, and then when they dig into it, they might realize they've got 20% Asians in IT, and that's not reflective of the kind of diversity that we want. We want all people to have equitable access to opportunities, right? So yeah, that's why there's all these multitude of groups, and I started off supporting Fusion because I'm an Asian myself, and Fusion was the only Asian group that I was aware of, and I didn't know at the time that Embrace existed. And that's part of the challenge of an employee resource group. Sometimes they exist, but they're invisible unless you go hunting for them. And so the challenge for you guys when you end up in your workplaces is to specifically look for employee resource groups, because if you wait to just simply hear about them, you might not come across them. But if you look for them, you'll find it. So, which is why I started off leading Fusion, but then I came across Embrace and thought, why are we divided in this? We should combine our forces and actually strive for the same thing.
Absolutely. So there's a question here about kind of related to employee resource groups. Hi, Ambily. Sometimes I've seen that the support for the ERG is there, but again, taking actions do require budget, and that's been a challenge. Have you faced this?
So I've been involved with Embrace for 1.5 years, but it was set up 3 years ago. And actually, the budget, by the time I got involved, it was less of an issue in terms of there was a budget provided to ERGs. So within GSK, I would say budget has not been a huge issue, at least currently. I think at the beginning stages, it was probably more of a challenge. But certainly, these are employee resource groups are voluntarily led by volunteers, right? It's led by people who are willing to take on something above their day job. And most of the time, there is no recognition for the work that happens as a result of it. So you're doing extra hours, but there's no recognition. And especially if you're raising your voice about race is a very uncomfortable topic for almost everybody, whether you're somebody who is a person of color or you're white, you're uncomfortable, you don't want to talk about race. And generally people who talk about race are considered troublemakers. So you have a triple advantage, you're doing extra work, doesn't get recognized, and you're considered a troublemaker. So yay, come join us, right? So actually recruiting people to come work for ERGs is a challenge. And it's only I would say in the last few months where we've seen tangible actions from our leaders really stepping up, that we've had a lot of renewed interest in our employee resource group. We've had a ton of people come to us and say, we want to be part of this, because they can see the company positively changing, right? They can see the changes happening. So absolutely, I think you will face those budgetary challenges and resource challenges, but all it takes is a handful of passionate people who can keep going. So hats off to my co-lead who started Embrace, a guy called Omar Ahmed. He kept going when actually there was hardly any support for it. So it's those kinds of inspirational individuals who kind of keep going on this journey that will get us to the eventual outcome, hopefully, in not too distant future.
So what are some of the things that you do to try to recruit people? If you had to recruit some of us right now, what would you say?
So it's always, you have to get something out of this, right? So we say a few things. I mean, for members, so people who want to come and join us and lend their voice, we offer a lot of events like you're doing. We bring in senior leaders who can teach them stuff, either share their career journeys. We provided a career toolkit to help them develop some skills. We offer some mentoring in collaboration with one of the other ERGs. We do diverse reverse mentoring. And we bring in external speakers who teach them about stuff. So just today, I was involved in a discussion about running a training course on microaggression and bias, because this is a topic that people want to learn more about, right? So that's one element of how do we attract people to come to Embrace, because we're doing these high profile events internally, so people are hearing about us. The other thing that we do is actually giving opportunities to the leaders who come and join us. Leaders as in the people who want to be part of the Embrace leadership team. So these may be individuals at any stage in their career, right? They could be quite junior staff, but they get to be part of a leadership team of Embrace. And they learn things like how to manage their little sub-team, how to influence change in the organization. Sometimes they're talking to senior leaders who are, multiple grades above them and having to influence change with them. So giving people that exposure to leadership opportunities that they can then take into their day job, right? They can use that as an interview experience to talk about. So those kinds of opportunities attract them.
Brilliant. I can see Olga has her hand raised. So Olga, please feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. Hopefully, can you hear me? I can actually know that. Okay, good. Thank you for like giving a lot of examples. But just like another issue that I've seen is that sometimes groups that can be considered minorities in an organization, like women, for example, they can perfectly understand lack of diversity when it comes to them, but then when you talk to them about race, they don't understand the same issues about race. So do you know of any examples how you can transfer this kind of empathy and understanding in that scenario?
That's a fantastic question, Olga. Absolutely fantastic question. So the challenges with gender, we had an issue, right? And we needed men to get on board to let women into the workplace. And yet, in a family scenario, most men are living with their mother, their sister, their daughter, etc. They're exposed to the other side all the time, right? And yet there was a barrier. Now, if you think about race, the challenge is that most Caucasians may not have to interact with an ethnic minority, with a minority person ever. If they wanted to avoid them in social circles, in a work scenario, they could get away with minimizing that contact. So they may not get to know us. So what I tend to do is I try and bring in the things that have worked in the gender equation and say these changes will lead to, the stuff we did right for gender will apply in the race equation as well. Because the challenge is the same. The challenge was that they looked at women and said, oh, we'd have to put special things in place. This is never going to work. Why do you need special treatment? And what do you mean we have to pay for you when you go off to have your baby? And, but all of these things that we have to do to let women in, so things like maternity pay and parental leave and flexible working are now the standard, right? It's helped all people, not just women. It has actually helped the other side. It's helped men have flexibility. It's prepared the entire workforce for working from home. There's parental leave provided to men as well. So these things that we have to put in place helps everybody. So the argument with race is the barriers are the same. We need allies to open the door. We need you guys to open the door, like the men open the door for women. We need our Caucasian allies to open the door. What we're striving for is really having equality. And the things that we have to put in place, like making hiring practices fairer, should only mean that it's a more equitable system, that everybody has equal access to opportunities based on potential, right? So all we're doing is leveling the playing field, and it will benefit everybody. So it's kind of saying, some of the things that worked in gender are setting aspirational targets. That's exactly what we're asking for in race. So it's kind of pulling the parallels of what's worked from the gender equation and applying it to race and saying, we know this worked in gender, we now need to apply the same logic to race, right? Does that make sense? Okay.
Hopefully that answers your
Yeah,
question.
yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And maybe you talked about how these ERGs, they're led by volunteers, and so I guess what would be your advice to any individuals who want to pursue these initiatives or be part of the leadership team? Because it is, alongside their full-time role, it is time, like you said, it's a challenge, it's, time they're giving up. So how do they strike a balance? How do they manage their time? Because it can be quite draining, these kind of initiatives.
It can be, but it can also be energizing. So we all strive for that purpose, right? What are we changing? There's no greater purpose than positive societal change, right? That's what we're striving for. The ultimate goal is to aim for positive change within the organizations you work in, but having repercussions broader than that. So it's, for me, this is, even though it takes up a lot of day job time from the day job, actually it's one of the most rewarding parts of my job. So, and really enjoyable. And actually, if once the organization starts coming along on the journey and they start realizing the value, then you start seeing the recognition follow, like the Empower Awards and everything else, so the kind of recognition will come provided you start driving the value. But it's hard work to get there. But that hard work is actually teaching you stuff, right? It's teaching you perseverance and learning to work with a bunch of people who are donating their time to you. How do you maximize that impact? So it's teaching you your own leadership skills and styles. And you're kind of learning things about leadership that you might not otherwise get the opportunity to experience. So there is a win-win in there, despite the hard work to do it.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask a question from Tina. Have you got any specific positive/negative moments that stuck in your mind about being a minority and it made you realize you had a platform to voice your opinion?
So I'll tell you about a negative moment that made me realize that I need to do something about it. So I went for a job where I was given feedback at the end of the role to say, you're great technically, we can really see you're determined, you can do the job, but you don't have the gravitas to sit around the leadership table. Now, for me, that was, I could have walked away from it going, they're probably right. But how do you measure gravitas? What is gravitas, And I also didn't particularly believe that feedback, because outside of the setting, I work with a charity where I'm interacting with CEOs, and I'm sitting on as a board of trustees group. So I'm already working as a leader in a different setting. So I knew that this was biased feedback, which was very subjective. So for me, when I hear subjective feedback, and I hear this all the time from individuals that, they told me I was brilliant, I had all the skills, but they didn't think I fitted in. And when you hear feedback that is subjective, challenge it. That would be, don't accept that, or don't try and change your personality, because it should be objective feedback that you're provided. And companies should be using objective feedback or criteria for choosing you. So challenging that was the sort of, going through that experience really accelerated my kind of wish to highlight that as an issue, to use the platforms that are available to me to chat about it and say, this is not okay, right? To challenge it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because a lot of things we hear, for example, when we look at like recruitment events and things like that, is that they'll always talk about company culture and a cultural fit, and there's of course an element of truth to that, but also, like you said, it's quite subjective in terms of, what does that really mean when someone tells you, oh yeah, you've ticked all the boxes, but you weren't just a right fit. So I think we come across that a lot.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I think what would be really nice to, you mentioned that, all this hard work does pay off, and, again, congratulations to you for being recognized on the 2020 Empower role model list. So wanted to understand what it means, what is this role model list? What does it mean to be on it? And how kind of has it changed you since you've been on it? Has it given you a different platform? Has it kind of motivated you to do new things, or not?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So with this sort of tag of role model, it does come with a sense of responsibility, right? That you need to drive some positive change, really live up to that name. So for me, the recognition was as a result of some of the work that we're doing in Embrace, where we are at change. We're speaking up for people who either might not be speaking up because they don't feel they have the power to, like they don't want to lose their job, by seeing as a troublemaker. So you're speaking up for those kinds of people, but you're also speaking up for those people who don't have the right circumstances available in their life at that moment to be brave, right? So not everybody, if, for instance, if there's a single mom who's trying to raise kids, she's not going to want to raise her voice and say, here's a challenge. So for me, being a role model is really about kind of voicing and speaking up for those people who can't, for whatever reason. And also, for me, what it really means is, this award is a one-year award, right? But I want that 15 minutes of limelight to actually mean or result in some lasting change. So personally, what I've done is taken that kind of recognition and decided that mentoring, as I talked about, is key for helping those in marginalized communities who may not have access to a mentor. And obviously, I'm running out of hours in the day, so I can't mentor lots of people. So a quick way of being able to mentor young kids, particularly, who might be looking to move into the corporate sector. I've kind of created a YouTube channel, and I've posted some quick 2-minute videos to try and help individuals kind of go who might be struggling with interview experience, who might be struggling with CVs and that kind of thing, to give people some tools that they can use. So I'm hoping that sort of practical help might be my legacy of being a Empower role model.
Brilliant. Great. So we're going to take some more final kind of questions. So please raise your hands or pop it into the chat box. I've got one here, which is, I have a female Indian friend who just finished her PhD in the UK. Her self-esteem is frankly relatively low regarding her own skills and therefore networking. I'm trying to provide tips and present starting points for her. Is there anything else that I can do to support and empower her?
So confidence is the number one factor that will influence if you get a job. When you talk about bias, people's bias thinking, if you walk into an interview and you don't believe that you deserve to get the job, that will come across in some way to the interviewer. So what you can do as a really good friend is build up their confidence, telling people what their strengths are. Sometimes you might not see your own strengths, but people who are close to you might be able to identify it. Why is she beating herself up about X or Y? Maybe you can build up their confidence and make them feel good about themselves, and do some kind of mock interview training or things like that, where you can help them kind of build up the way they come across. Sometimes even the simple things like making eye contact, people tend to kind of look down and talk. Simple things like smiling, being relaxed, maintaining eye contact goes a long way. So giving them those little tips would help them in being prepared for an interview stage.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. When we started our MBAs, we were in like little syndicates, and Charvi and I were in the same syndicate. And one of the things we did as Leadership Plus, as like our exercise, was to write good things about each other and tell them. Don't know if you remember, Charvi, but we did that, and I remember feeling like, oh, people think this about me. I had no idea. I think that was a really great exercise. So I could, yeah, definitely also.
I cried.
She cried.
We should be doing more of that, right? We very rarely tell people the things that we really appreciate about them. So yeah, just telling someone, even people who you think might be naturally confident, may have insecurities that you really don't know. So just telling them what you genuinely think about them is a positive step.
Brilliant, great, and we're really doing well-ish on time, so that's good as well. Yes, so thank you again, Billy, for coming on this platform and sharing your experience with us. It's been great, and to everyone who's engaged so much throughout the session today, thanks to everyone for coming. Yeah, thank you. We're going to wrap up here.
Great, thank you, Sresha. Wish you all the best.
Yes, have a lovely evening, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.